Good afternoon. So I'll pick from where Lance
Thanks,
thanks. Yeah, I'm short. I'll pick from where Lance stopped. And what I'll be looking at much more is more on land cover and really using the remote sensing platform, both the high resolution and low resolution, to look at the land cover changes. In terms of resilience, and I think this was talked earlier, we have one part which is hazard, and I think let's like in Kenya, a lot of that work has been done by our colleagues from the NDMA, the National Drought Management Authority. But one of the key things that's missing, it's really, I cannot see the screen here, it's the big one. Oh, I have to just do it, eh? Okay.
I don't know, sorry.
Because I cannot read it from here, it's okay. So again, the part of the resilient work that I'll be working on is much more looking at, it's too small for me here.
Sorry, yeah, no, not right now, yeah.
Sure, I can go up from I can look at the screen there. So what I'll be covering here is really to look at what is the future, and I think that is quite important to look at. And my colleague will look at much more of the hazard, that's Bernard. In terms of pressure, and this is a slide that it's for Kenya. If you look at the population in 1960, it was less than 10 million. Right now in Kenya, we're talking about 40 million. By 2050, we're talking about 80 million. And I got that slide from of the water per capita from UNEP. If you look at it, it was almost like a full cup. You follow. In 2050, you can imagine how much will reduce, and that's the pressure. And where does this really pressure come from? It's both from population, but also on the resources that we misuse. So what I'll do is really cover much more of the arid land, and many of us really, when we work on the arid lands, we try and dissociate between the arid lands and also the watersheds. And yet you find there's a connection in pastoral system between the watersheds and also the lower areas. And what we have done here is to pick about 8 sites. And if you look at the population in 1960, that's the slide on your left, the population was quite low in terms of those particular areas. And this was also based on the policy by then, before the independence, where people were settled in different areas. And if you look at the population right now, you can see it's expanding, but it's also expanding in those areas where we have a lot of natural resources. So in terms of land cover, and this is from our colleagues who are working on land cover and land use group, they have come with a number of causes. One is to look at the proximate causes, but also the other is to look at the underlying causes. Again, we have a very big list of all those causes. What I'll pick up here is just the population, because that's what we are looking at. A population that came from 10 million to 40 million to 80 million. How is the population really progressing? So my focus will be on population. And if you look at the population, and that's your, what you call it, the slide above, that's how the population in those counties are increasing. So some counties were less than 500,000 people, yeah? And right now you can see the above, 500,000 people, yeah? But if you look at the relationship between people and rainfall, and that is where people were dispersed, that's the blue line. That was in the 1960s, where the population and rainfall were. So you find that certain areas where population were really low, yeah, but the potential was high. And the red one is now in 2009. You can see it has raised, and some of the districts have moved from very low population now to very high population. And you can see from those curves, yeah, some of the rangelands, they've also exceeded the population even of high potential areas in terms of population growth. And this is much more of the immigration that is coming in. So again, I think that gives us a focus on how population have increased. Now in remote sensing, and this is where many of us have been asked, what is the importance of remote sensing in the last 30 years? How can you monitor the environment? And in here, what we have done right now is to look at the last 30 years of remote sensing and look at how vegetation changes have grown. And this is a low resolution satellite we've mixed with a high resolution satellite. So this is the low resolution satellites. And for all those districts, you can see the dynamics. Some have gone down, some have gone up, you follow, yeah? And I'll show you how it's related with population. So the other image you can see how the greenness is sort of progressing. That's a yearly progress of vegetation around Africa. Now, if I look at how can you analyze between population and vegetation growth, these are the different curves, yeah? And I'll show you some of the data and how the different sort of counties, the dynamics are quite different. I picked out the Mau, and for many of us who come from East Africa, it's one of the most important area that has its water that goes into Kenya, but also into Tanzania. The Serengeti are all supported by the Mau. So if you look at the vegetation, the land cover, and this is now the high resolution. This is from a science paper that was published in 2013. Look at the forest cover changes throughout the world. So if you have one, we have one on 2001, then 2012, we can see the changes, the green changes, and the map on the extreme, what you call the orange color shows you the decline in forest cover. And if you relate it with the population, you can see as the population were increasing, also the land cover decreases. And that the picture down really shows what has been happening. First, you have the fires, you have the opening, and the extreme end is where you see almost all the forest is open. So if you go to the Mara, in the last 10 years, that's what you see. All the forest that has been done there. And from our analysis, you can pick up both from the high resolution, but also the low resolution data. In terms of livestock, in the Mara, you can see both the sheep and goats have gone up, but also cattle, but they've gone up in relation to the wildlife. So the wildlife numbers have gone down. It's almost about 80 to 90% of the wildlife declines in those particular areas. So you can see the trade-off between cattle, livestock, and wildlife. So for some of us, really, we're working also on wildlife. We've come up with payment from wildlife conservation that we're paying, the pastoralists are being paid to keep some of those areas open. Yeah. In terms of the same sort of district, which is next to it, we have Kajiado. You can see the cattle have gone down, and they have not really recovered in the last 10 years. So again, in terms of resilience, it's quite different. This is another area that we were looking at. This is Nyeri. So this is where Mount Kenya, and you can see the curve that I was talking about. Yeah, population was increasing, the vegetation went down, but right now it has recovered. And why has it recovered? There's a lot of effort in terms of reforestation, but there's a lot of effort in terms of increasing the value of crops in those particular areas so that people don't open up more area, yeah, because of what you call it, to get more money based on the area. So again, there's a lot of effort, and those are the evidence that we try to get in terms of the efforts that have been done there. So you can see really the increase, but also this particular county is one county that has the least population growth rate. Yeah, so again, I think it's a combination of many factors. In terms of rangelands, and I think this is where many of our colleagues in remote sensing, they've sort of focused so much on forests. And here in this particular project, we'll really look at what you call it, changes in the drylands. And one of the things that we've looked at is to look at using the high resolution data to see if there are any changes. And in the rangelands, it's the same, it's not the same, but also we are seeing a greening up of some of those areas. I think in West Africa it's quite clear, but in East Africa there's very little that has been done to see how some of those areas have been sort of greening up. So one of the things that have turned the greening up is land tenure that has changed, but also the population, since has increased so much, people right now sort of dividing the land, but also putting a lot of effort and investment in those particular land. Yeah. So here it's one of the areas it's West Pokot, it's near Uganda. So one of the images, the top image is 1983. So you can see where you have the red, these are the riverine, and the second what you call image is 2013, and this is from the Landsat 8 for my colleagues who are working in remote sensing, a recent what you call it, launch of the satellite, and you can see all those reds. Those are farms that have been what you call, they've been growing trees for the last 30 years. So the VI project from Sweden have been working for the last 30 years, and you can see now the evidence even in the images itself. Yeah. So again, if you look at in terms of relationship between vegetation index, even with the very low resolution, you can see an increase, yeah, in terms of productivity. What we have there is that we have this project is still going on, and what we're trying to do is look at the next steps. So again, I think the dynamics and trajectories of land cover is quite important in resilience. Yeah, and I think we need to, what you call it, to pay attention to that. The other part I think which we haven't done here is to relate what are the climate factors that could have had a bearing on vegetation, so that we can separate what is anthropogenic and also what is climatic. But also on the livelihood, we know very well that with these changes, there are changes in breeds, the changes in the, composition, and what are the benefit of having this enclosure versus having the traditional one. But also we realize that we have, it's a sort of an arid area. What is also the trade-off between sedentary and also the non-sedentary population. So here mobility will be quite important. And some of these areas we see really there's a big role of both the family and the women. So the women empowerment is quite important. I think that's all. Thank you very much.